Okay, let's get together here. I mean, we're jumping around, and I think we're going to have a beautiful, interesting hour, okay?
Right.
Because of this subject, I was going to get to this later, but since you opened it, let's deal with it, okay? You're in the Bible Belt, gentlemen.
I heard so.
You heard so. And I must tell our audience, we had dinner together earlier, and we got into this a little bit. So you're going to hear some interesting things. Because you guys are taking issue with a lot of what we grew up with in the Bible as fact. And you're telling me that's not so. You got to
It
put
is.
that.
I brought it right here.
What is it?
Before I show you the picture you wanted to see.
All right.
This is Pope Pius XII. In his private chapel, praying to the Black Madonna child and all the popes of Rome.
Where'd you
in
get
their
that?
private, this from the church. The Roman Catholic Church itself. Itself. I just got rid of the copy of the history of the Black Madonna last night. I brought one copy. It's published by the Roman Catholic order of nuns called the Daughters of St. Paul. And they said that the picture of the Black Madonna child in Poland is reputed to have been painted by St. Luke. Now, St. Luke is said to have been one of Jesus' disciples. He ought to know what Jesus had looked like. So if he painted a black woman and child, who am I to say that he wasn't? Besides that, however, in Anacalypsis...
So now you guys are saying Jesus was black?
We're not saying it. It's what has been written up until the Nicene Conference of Bishops in 325, when Rome, under the order of Constantine, the Roman emperor, ordered the 219 bishops at Nicaea, and they took away Christianity from the Africans. Just remember that before they said Jesus was born in a manger in Bethlehem, they said he was born in a cave in Ethiopia. It was at the Nicene Conference they changed that. Let's go further.
Wait a minute, let me be sure I'm following you now. You're saying that the birth of Christ as we know it is not accurate.
It's a farce. It was only
You realize what you're saying?
a farce, a lie. You know what a lie is?
A lie is a lie.
The person who wrote that at the Nicene Conference of Bishops in 325 AD, Constantine, the Roman emperor, ordered a conference be held because Rome wanted to take over Christianity from the people who started it. Christianity was started with Pantheus and Boetius in a place called Alexandria in Egypt. And Egypt is in Africa. I saw it up to January the 9th, it was there.
You talked about that a little bit last night in your lecture. There was a lecture last night, Dr. Simmons, here on campus. You talked about the separation of people don't want us to see Egypt as part of Africa. You talked about the historical thing about blacks being in Egypt as well.
Yes, what I did last night...
I don't want to get away from the other point.
I just saying
that
what happened is that I dealt last night with the fact that Herodotus, that the institutions of higher learning, white institutions, considered the father of history. He himself, when he visited Egypt around 450 BC, almost half a thousand years before Christ, said that the Ethiopians, the Egyptians, the people of cultures, which is part of present-day Turkey, were people of black skin and woolly hair. All right? And so I just want you to understand that the Egyptians we now see are conquerors, just like people who came here and took this land from the Indians, so that they're not indigenous to Africa, those who now rule Egypt. And Egypt is just as much a part of Africa as Birmingham or Alabama is part of the so-called United States.
Let me add this.
Let me just be clear on this. So what you're saying to me now is that the people that we see, Sadat and all those guys, are not true Egyptians?
No.
The fact that
Sadat's mother was a Sudanese, Nasser's mother was a Sudanese, but their fathers were Arab conquerors. The one that was the African was Mohammed Naguib, the first president of Egypt, the one that overthrew Farouk. But 1 year after that, since he was looking for a hookup with the other Nile Valley countries as it used to be in antiquity, he was removed by the Arab conquerors. The Arabs didn't come to Egypt until 640. The first non-African people came to Egypt, otherwise called the Hyksos, in 1675 BC. The Africans there were already in the 13th dynasty period. They had built every pyramid you saw there before. They had done the S-turn in the Nile. They built every one of the major temples that had already been built, including the Grand Lodge of Luxor. The first European to come there did not arrive until the Greeks arrived with Alexander II, the son of Philip of Macedonia.
Look, I'm a college graduate. I never heard all this stuff before.
Because they didn't intend to teach you that. They can't tell you that you're inferior and teach you that you taught Europe. The first Europeans to be civilized by the Africans were the Greeks. When you heard of Homer, the first European to have written anything, you couldn't miss that. They said that Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. And that was not until 833 BC. The Africans had already in 255,000 at the Tassili Mountain. They had the Sibyllian period, first, second, and third, the pre-dynastic period, all the way up. The Africans had produced men like this, Imhotep, the multi-genius that designed the step pyramid of Saqqara. The first man to be a physician that even Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, is giving him credit and call him the god of medicine. The Greeks changed his name from Imhotep to Aesculapius. There he is. There he is.
Wait a minute. This gets into what you were saying. So wait a minute. You guys are telling me now that black men taught Homer and...
As a matter of
went
fact,
to Egypt to school.
As a matter of fact, the Egyptians said Homer was Egyptian, not Greek.
That's right. It's only the Europeans said that. The Westerners now said that he was. But let us go back. Remember that Homer himself said in the Odyssey what? That the gods Zeus and Apollo, Europe's first gods, came from Ethiopia. Go read it. And I didn't write it. He wrote it. Thales, from Thales down to Socrates. And Socrates down to Aristotle, which they call the pre-Socratian philosophers and the post-Socratian philosophers. Each and every one, including Plato, who spent 15 years in Egypt receiving their education.
You're saying Plato was educated in Egypt?
15 years. Before that, you heard nothing of him. Every one of them.
What you have me believe then also, for part of what you said last night, is that Plato and these guys went back home, and they were big guys. But they were taught in Egypt? Is that what you said?
They came there
for their education.
And they said it. They didn't hide it. It's the modern writers, the modern instructors and professors who trying to deny it.
Right,
you can't have in a racist school in Birmingham non-racist education.
Let me get to something you said last night that's not going to make you very popular in this town and may not allow you to get safely out of town. You told an audience last night that you saw, I think, in a tomb in Egypt.
Yeah.
You saw it with your own two eyes, right?
Yes.
You told me that Moses, there were more than 10 commandments. Moses just took
42. The negative confessions. Moses isn't supposed to have been born until 1349 BC. The Africans were already in the 18th dynastic period. Akhenaten, who died before Moses was born, and Imhotep, who died more than 2,000 years before the birth of Moses, and others at the Grand Lodge of Mem had 42 laws called now the negative confession, one for each nome. They go like this: I have not killed man nor woman. I have not spoken ill of the gods. Moses is supposed to be born in Egypt, they said, at a place called Sukkot. Already, it says that Moses get the 10 commandments of Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is still in Africa, right? The Sinai Peninsula is a part of Egypt. More so, is it possible for Moses to be born in Egypt, educated in Egypt? At age 85, he's still in Egypt, and he did not learn the negative confessions? Is it possible for you to go to school, born in the United States, go to kindergarten, elementary, junior high school, and college, and never heard of the United States Constitution? Then it would have been impossible for Moses, when everybody had to read the negative confession 5 times a day, for Moses not to have seen those 42 laws and extracted 10 of them, leave 32 more. Now, if you could go to the temple of Setaiwan at Abydos, to go to the tomb of Ramesses VI at the Valley of the Kings, go to the temple of Edfu, where you would, by the way, see the story of an immaculate conception and a virgin birth 4,100 years before the Mary and Jesus story.
As a matter of fact,
wait.
No,
let me understand.
This is shocking.
Let me just put it in form of a question then. I mean, I don't want to stop this, because we're here for information. But what you're trying to get me to believe is that Moses didn't get the 10 commandments from Mount Sinai, but he got them
from his fellow Africans.
Moses was the high priest in Egypt, a high priest of the Egyptians in Egypt. Then what was he teaching? He wasn't a high priest of the Jews.
There were no Jews in those days. They called them. Remember now, there was no Israel yet. Israel is not until 1196. And when we to hear of Abraham, Avram as he was called, coming into Egypt. The Africans already in Egypt, already in their 14th dynastic period when he shows up. All of the pyramids are built. That's another thing. Every one, the 62 pyramids in Egypt were built before the first Jew was born.
Why was he fleeing from the Pharaoh?